Hi, Ben here and welcome back to the workshop for another work in progress Wednesday. Now today I'm working on sort of fiddly little bits, but they're a major component that go in our Nomad friction folders. So I'm making backspacers today. Now the backspacers, I tend to make them out of G10 material because it's very strong, very stable, and you can also precision grind it to a particular thickness. Now when I buy this material in, I tend to buy it in big sheets like this, well, pretty big. I actually buy them in even bigger sheets if it's a particular colour. This is some blue for the new Ed Stafford bush tools, so this is the Nomad backspacers for those. And I've cut a strip and then I've basically rough marked the shape that I need, and I've drilled a hole in there for where the thong tube goes, so you can see the sort of the rough profile of it. But at this stage it's not the correct thickness, so at the moment if I turn my vernier on, make sure it's 0, this is measuring sort of 3.34, something like that, and it has to come down to about 3.10, something like that, somewhere around that thickness, and that means that it's the correct thickness for the blade and the washers. Now if you haven't got a surface grinder, and in the early days I didn't have this piece of kit and I'd have to manually sand this down to the right thickness with a piece of sandpaper on a surface plate, but now I've got the surface grinder, so that's going to allow me to get some real precision results. Now, big question, obviously when you're grinding this, we tend to use a magnetic chuck on a surface grinder. And obviously G10 is not magnetic, so how do you attach that to there? You can use double-sided tape, you can use super glue, but what I've found is this really nifty method is obviously on my magnetic chuck, I've got some parallels that you use for when you're milling and things like that. And as long as you choose parallels that are thinner than the thickness that you're going to be grinding it down to, you can use those. So I don't want to lose my shape that I've scribed on there at the moment. So I'm going to pop that in there, and it helps if it's at a bit of an angle, and I use my parallels and I use the sharp corners to sort of wedge it in place like so. So obviously this isn't magnetic, but the parallels are made out of steel, so that's going to hold it in place. And then the beauty of the surface grinder is you can adjust the height that this is running next to the normally a stone disc, but this is actually adapted so that it runs with a sanding belt. I've got a 60 grit Cubitron belt on there, and I've made this little attachment. This grinder itself doesn't have a digital readout, but I've made a little digital readout so I can get the right thickness. So at the moment it's reading sort of 0.29, that's how much I'm removing from the actual surface of that material. And I adjust the height by winding this handle basically, so that goes up and down, and that adjusts the height that grinding wheel will be running parallel to the surface plate. So I'm going to set that back so that it's reading 0.29 again, like so. And I'll run the grinder. Now it's a bit noisy so you won't hear me, but I'm going to turn on my extractor. And then we'll have another little measure. So that is 3.09 now. So around 3.10, that's where I normally aim. So that's perfect now. That'll be perfect for the Nomads. And we'll take that over to the bench and you'll see exactly where that backspacer actually goes in the Nomad and why it's so critical. So this is the assembly bench where obviously I glue up all the knives and I start to assemble the Nomads and stuff. So the reason why we need to make sure that backspacer is exactly the right thickness, we've got our sort of rough parts of our Nomad. So we've got the micarta, natural micarta with some blue fibre, well they're actually G10 liners in there, so that's going to give that lovely signature blue liner look. And we want that to be the correct thickness, which will allow the blade that we've got here, still got a little bit of WD-40 on it, let me clean that off. So we've got the blade, then we end up with two phosphorus bronze washers either side of it, which are pretty thin, and that will allow the blade to pivot. Even though you tighten the blade up, it will still allow it to move. So you need to have the blade thickness, the thickness of those two washers to allow that to tighten up, and obviously it's crucial because we use these hardened stainless pivot bolts as well. So it's all to do with how much you counterbore these, the thickness of your backspacer, the thickness of your blade, and the thickness of the washers. So I'm not into maths, I never have been, so I struggle a bit with that side of things when it comes to knife making, but has a practical application. So if you want to learn maths, start making knives. That's the way I reckon. But I've finally got one together. This is all assembled. I've shaped the handle, it's been blasted so it has this lovely texture to it, and what we're looking for is that even though that pivot bolt is now tightened, we've got a blade that still moves freely. It's not stiff or graunchy, but it's got a real positive amount of friction so that it won't sort of flop down on your fingers, and you still have to physically open the blade to make it into a secure sort of usable knife really. Now the beauty of the friction folder is obviously it's UK legal. This is sub 3 inches. It's got no mechanical lock. This sort of spur that you see sticking out the front of the handle, one, it allows you to open the blade really easily, but when you're actually using it, that spur sits in the actual handle so that that blade can't fold on your fingers. So very low tech, but very, very practical. So yeah, that's one of the first Ed Stafford bush tool Nomads, all finished up. Just got to make a sheath for it and sharpen it, and it should be ready to go on its way. So yeah, a little bit of maths, a little bit of surface grinding, a little bit of fiddly stuff making backspacers this Wednesday, but it's an essential part to get those Nomads working perfectly for you. So that's what we're working on this Wednesday. Hope you're all having a good week, and we'll see you next time.